Good morning, class. Today's lecture will be on the most significant diseases. So we'll look at what kills people, what causes the most morbidity or disability, and in the US and in the world. So good stuff. You should know what the most pressing healthcare issues are, because there's all kinds of diseases, a lot of rare diseases, but these are ones that affect us the most. All right, and this changes through time too, and definitely depends on where you live in the world. So we will talk about, you can see mortality obviously is easy to measure because the person dies. Bam. We're going to see morbidity. That's looking at sickness and ill health. And that one's a little hard to get our finger on. It's not, you can see how that data is a little skewed because everyone's perception of illness and when they seek healthcare and what a disability is, all these things is much more fluid than dead or alive, right? And diseases that are acute, it means rapid, breaking an arm, getting a cold. A chronic disease is one that lasts for a long period of time. And we'll talk about aging, which is a weird topic. Why we age, what it means to have a lifespan of humans being 100, 110 years maybe, and a mouse being a couple years, and why that is. All right, so causes of death, mortality, causes of mortality. We have a really good handle on this because when people die, experts fill out a death certificate, and we have that data is all compiled state by state, the whole country, and we can look at causes of death and feel pretty confident. I mean, there'll be an occasional error here or there, but overall, we know how old people are when they die, why they died, and we can study this and we can take a look and see, what are our biggest challenges? What is killing people, and how can we prevent that? And we look at all the possible ways to die. We're going to see that 70% of our deaths are caused by the top 5. So it's really asymmetrical. I mean, your chance of dying of typhoid or decapitation, is way down the list compared to cancer, heart disease, things like that, right? And this, of course, varies depending on your age. And we'll take a look at that. I'll show you that, how, your causes of death when you're a baby versus a teenager versus elderly are very different. You're in different parts of your life with different risks and different disease risks too. So here we go. This is it. So if you look at, these are the top 5. So the big ones really, they're close. We think cancer may be overtaking heart disease in the near future, but heart disease and cancer. So heart disease, we're talking about atherosclerosis, which causes narrowing of the coronary arteries usually. And so you get a heart attack when part of the myocardial infarction, when part of the heart muscle is deprived of oxygen and gets ischemic and dies. And congestive heart failure, a lot of things happen, obviously there. Cancers, we'll talk about that pretty soon here. It's going up. And I should say, really, when we look at causes of death, you may say, oh my God, cancer rate is going up and up and up. Maybe it's something with the environment. There's more toxins and maybe things are causing an increase in cancer rate. But what's really going on here, I mean, that might be partly true, is that we're getting better at diagnosing blood pressure early and reducing heart disease and some other things, infectious diseases and other kinds of diseases. As they come down, cancer is a disease of old age, usually. It's because the cells, they divide, they make mistakes. And so what happens is cancer seems to be increasing, but you can't just look for causes of cancer. You have to look at, well, something's going to kill you eventually. And if those other things are brought down, cancer will float towards the top. And then issues with the lungs, COPD, emphysema, bronchitis, that kind of thing. Yeah, accidents are up there, mostly car accidents. And when you look at automobile accidents, about half alcohol is involved. I think you're all aware of that. And then CVAs, or cerebrovascular accident or a stroke is up there too. And that with the heart disease are related often to atherosclerosis and high blood pressure, hypertension. Yeah, those are the big ones, right? So heart disease and cancer are up there. As you go down, you can see Alzheimer's increasing with an aging population, complications from diabetes, pneumonia, kidney disease, suicide up there too. Now, of course, this, if you look at a young child, it's not going to be heart disease and cancer, right? So we're going to see if you look at, age 1 to 4, accidental trauma, sadly enough, indeed. And early on, congenital anomalies. So things, you have children that die early on because of developmental or genetic issues where that's, sadly, that's their lifespan is short. It's obviously not going to be congenital anomalies an issue with the elderly because, it's something that's going to affect you if it's life-threatening early on. You only have so long to survive. And the homicide, oh my God, it's horrible. But there are, you can see some cancers and the heart can have issues and yeah. All right, so you need to know those top causes of death: heart disease, cancer, and I'm looking at pulmonary issues, lung issues, accidents, strokes. And if you're very young, it's congenital things that you were born with, that your lifespan is going to be short, or accidents and other deaths like that. Yeah. All right, well, this is fluid. And just to show you, just put this on here, looking at in 2020, that list is has a newcomer, COVID-19. So this is a pandemic. It's killed, as of now, 580,000 in the US, think about worldwide. And we had a similar pandemic in 1918 that killed millions of people worldwide. And yeah, so look at that, jumped right up there. And this just shows, this is a study looking at what's the excess deaths from what the background kind of death rate. And you can see that COVID has made the death rate worldwide go way up than what's expected. And it varies. We think about some of the richer countries like the US and Western Europe being affected, but a lot of the poorer countries in Asia and stuff, it's had even a greater impact. All right, worldwide. So it's not the US. Let's take a look. So cardiovascular disease and cancer. All right, okay. Same as we have in the US. And then respiratory diseases. Okay, it's kind of following the same thing. Dementia. Neonatal means soon after birth. Diarrheal diseases. Now, you see something like that. We see less in the US, but it's a big killer in nations that don't have as good a health care. And if you have an infant with a diarrheal disease, cholera, something like that, in the US, take them to the hospital, put it on an IV because they're going to lose so much fluid. But it's a big killer the rest of the world. Yeah. And tuberculosis, again, other parts of the world, HIV, malaria. That's a good example. We had malaria in the US, so we got rid of the mosquitoes with DDT, which is another issue. But in parts of the world, malaria is a huge killer, spread by mosquitoes. And but so if you look at worldwide, if you could decide to practice or live other places in the world, just we're not just going to focus on the United States, but you can see there's other factors. And again, looking at just April of last year, you can see that COVID was up as the second killer. So things can come into this and leave depending on how serious they are. And this is really interesting. I want you guys to realize what actually kills people, and then what people worry about or think's going to kill them. So this is fascinating. So this first column here is causes of death. So you see heart disease, cancer, accidents, pulmonary disease, right? That's what we talked about. But then look over here, media coverage, terrorism and homicides, right? And suicide. So, and then what people are Google searching, what are they searching for? Heart disease it's the biggest killer, but people are, they're looking at, they're worried about, we we put big emphasis on, you know, like 9/11. We're talking about some 3,000 people dying all at once, but realize, 400,000 people die a year due to smoking, and so we look at these things where these mass deaths, and we fixate, this is how I'm going to die, but in reality, it's the heart disease and the cancer that's killing most people. So it's so interesting to take a look at this and see what people worry about, what they search, what's reported versus what's actually your biggest, danger and risk in the world. People are so worried about, shark deaths and snake bites, but, your chances getting hit by lightning are greater than dying in that way. And one more, and I'll stop. By looking at the causes of death, you can see that heart disease, circulatory issues, cancers, respiratory are big. Looking at musculoskeletal or genitourinary or infections like that make up a small part. There's some top killers out there. All right, so we looked at causes of death, and you guys know like the top causes of death there. And then what are some risk factors that lead to this? And because the heart disease is number one, atherosclerosis. A diet high in cholesterol and lack of exercise and genetic factors will cause your arteries to have plaque buildup, less flexibility, which will cause hypertension, which will cause the greater possibility of clots forming, and which can form strokes or form myocardial infarctions. So diet, exercise, some of it's just genetics and age, atherosclerosis. And related to that, of course, is hypertension. High blood pressure, just imagine in your house, if you just turned up the water pressure, kept turning it up, the weak points would start leaking, right? And that's the same thing. You have this high blood pressure, and the weakest part of your arteries may get an aneurysm, may blow up and get a hemorrhagic stroke or aneurysms other places. So hypertension also is asymptomatic. You walk around with hypertension and you don't know unless you go to CVS and put your and test it or get at the doctors or even the dentist. They check for hypertension. So it's a thing that if we check for it, we can then address it. But the people that don't get checkups, and they walk around like a ticking time bomb with this hypertension. Yep, and of course smoking and obesity, right? Right. Both of those you all are very familiar. Besides just the lung cancer, smoking has been found to, increase diabetes, infertility, cancers, bladder cancer, all kinds of cancers. And so it impedes healing. If you go for a procedure, if you smoke, they won't even give you the procedure because you're not going to heal very well. So it's a horrible, horrible habit. And causes a tremendous financial, physical toll on our society. And obesity too, of course, greater risk of hypertension and diabetes, all these things. And that, there's a behavioral and a genetic component. So it's not a simple fix at all. Let's take a look. Risk factors in high-income countries. So tobacco use, high blood pressure, overweight, activity, high blood sugar. Diabetes can cause a lot of complications too. So risk factors, these are things you could possibly get under control to help that. Oh, and then I have, let's see if I can, I'll show you this here. I'm going to stop showing that. Oh my goodness. Okay, open this web page. Okay. I'm going to stop share. Get a share screen. See, I'm not 100% that you are looking at this. Let's see. meeting. Excuse me for a moment. I just want to make sure you can see this. There we go. I feel like you're seeing this. Okay. It's just looking at different causes of death, and it separates it out a little bit with age. So let's take a look at this. So you can see from the left is when you're young, you're a teenager, in your 20s, a lot of you. And then as you get elderly, you can see the cause of death. And this is for separates out men, women, and we can look at black, white, too, kind of thing. So you can see early in life, I see what's obvious here is external causes. So you can see in your teens, your late teens and early 20s, there's a lot of risk taking, a lot of things that can, automobile accidents, things like that. And as you can see, cancer in red, of course, it's interesting. You have a little peak if you have an early cancer, and then you seem to be, it's when you get in your teens and 20s, if you made it past that, you're not going to get, it's rare to get cancer, but then it increases with age. And it kind of tapers down too. See your cancer in the 60s and 70s, but if you didn't get cancer then, you're more likely to die of a heart issue. You can see circulatory heart issue gets bigger like that. Yeah. Interesting. And then this is female. Here's male. Well, one thing you notice is that external causes goes way up. So men, more risk-taking, stupid behaviors. You can see that really goes up. Let's look at the circulatory, the purple. So there's female. Oh, I see. Yeah. So men are more likely to have heart attacks earlier, and it's true. And then it kind of catches up when you're past a certain age, past the 70s. Men and women are equally likely to die of a heart attack, but men have a greater risk early on. Yeah, and then let's look at just race. We just look at one: white versus black. Interesting. Let's see. A little less cancer. How about external causes? Oh, external causes, look at that. It actually, so this is black and this is white. White, the external causes continues to be a higher rate in the elderly, less so younger. This would be American Indian or Native American. Oh, quite a difference there too. See that choppiness? I think that's because of a lower sample size, and so it's a little more choppy. Asian. Oh, look at that. So Asian, less external causes cancer seems to really go up. Let's see. Anyway, yes, this is fascinating. So just so you know, race and sex are going to be factors for mortality. So looking at the worldwide, let's look at these risk factors that lead to mortality. So you can see, look at blood pressure is up there, and tobacco. Yeah, see these things, you're all familiar with these, being, educated, interested in health, blood pressure, smoking, cholesterol, underweight, which is interesting because there's a lot of obesity in this country. But if you're looking at the world with less nutrition, that's going to be definitely that. Unsafe sex. It's kind of mostly HIV causes death. Oh, look at that. Diets. Here's obesity and inactivity. Alcohol is a risk factor, definitely. And then you start to see these deficiencies, iron and zinc and vitamin A. So in the world, yeah, there's a big vitamin A deficiency, and causes blindness and mental deficiencies during growth that we don't think about as much in the United States. Okay, so now mortality is death, lethal, right? Morbidity is going to be sickness, illness, disability. Again, a little harder to get our finger on because death is pretty clear cut. Yes, not easy to standardize. And even depending on cultures and stuff, what you define as illness and health changes. So it's a complex subject. So how are we going to get a handle on this? Well, there's a couple ways we can look at this. One is, why do people go to the doctor? Like, so we can definitely compile that. And so these are the reasons people go. And so the first two are not even an illness per se. First is you bring, number one is bringing a child, bringing a baby. You make a doctor's visit to make sure it's healthy, developing right, proper nutrition, all these things. And then hypertension, a lot of people with high blood pressure will go to get their blood pressure checked and that kind of thing. Yeah. And then acute upper respiratory, colds and flu. And something like a cold is acute. So it's very rapid. It can be debilitating. It can be a disability at the time, but there's no long-term effects to that, right? So we see that. And then people go for arthritis and diabetes, get some cancer. Normal pregnancy is up there, a gyno exam. This is a middle ear infection. A lot of babies will have tubes put in their ears, things like that. And yeah, allergies and sinus infection. Yeah. So that's what we're looking at if you look at why people go to the doctor, why they make an appointment. Right. And then, okay, so, but there's issues with this, looking at this data, why people make a doctor's appointment. And if you look at, even in this one of the richest nations in the world, there's a huge disparity between the haves and the have-nots. I'll have a couple slides here talk about to be poor and is setting you up to be more likely to have morbidity and mortality as well. If you live in a rural area and you don't have money, you're much less likely to visit the doctor as if you live, a rich suburb kind of thing, definitely. And it is expensive to be poor. I mean, besides the fact that, you can't, things like your car and rental, all these things, it can be a real cycle to keep you in poverty and why it's so hard to get out of that. But with health too, if you, a lot of people, if you don't have health insurance, they don't get regular checkups, regular flu shots. They don't get teeth cleanings. And what happens is they end up just going to the emergency room when things have progressed far enough that they have real symptoms. So as I don't want to get political, et cetera, but as a society, it'd actually be cheaper if we had healthcare for everyone, because you end up with people not taking regular routine care, and they end up being really expensive going to the hospital later when it's progressed, when it gets harder to treat. And if we just, had people have regular checkups, we would avoid that catastrophic, loss later on. Yeah. And so indeed, and if you look even further, if you think about this, and I suppose you guys maybe will have classes looking at this, I find it fascinating, is that this poverty and health, it's this vicious cycle where you don't have the money to go to the doctor. And so you don't have health insurance because your job is such that you're paid under the table, you have a job without health benefits. And so you end up, not going when you should, and you're waiting till it's too late. And then you end up with this huge bill that you can't pay, putting you further in poverty. And even if you're living, growing up poor, you have more stress, you have more cortisol. You're not sure you're going to have that meal. You have a little less nutrition, even in utero, even from beginning before you're born. A poor mother not having proper nutrition, having greater stress because of all the life stressors being poor. And that cortisol, of course, raises blood sugar and doesn't allow proper healing and development. And so, and then you live in places, neighborhoods that have more environmental issues. You take jobs that perhaps put you at greater risk because you need the money. And so there's a huge difference here. And I hope you guys study some of this, is looking at patients and their environment and how poverty and health are related. And it is this vicious circle. Yeah, and looking worldwide, you see poor nations, et cetera, without not having adequate drinking water and sanitation and crowding and not being able to afford healthcare, and climate change, and all these things are contributing to this. So a lot of big factors here, right? Looking at the United States, we're here looking at is the states and their health performance that was measured. And you can see, looking at Maine, look at the Northeast, we're looking, that's good. You can see it's at the top of the healthcare rating. Where it's bad is the South Nevada. Yeah. So, and a lot of this depends on how rich the area is and the political climate, and how important you think healthcare is, whether it's a right for all people or it's everyone's on their own, and the poor can pull themselves up by their bootstraps or whatever. And this shows where the uninsured are. And again, you see the same thing. The Northeast looks pretty good, but you see a lot of the South uninsured. And that means they just go to the emergency room, or they're not going to go to the doctor when they should. They're not going to have regular checkups. And so, yeah. Looking at Maine, you can see it looks good on the coast in terms of numbers insured. This is generally, of course, wealthier, more educated jobs that are going to have healthcare, as opposed to more northern rural Maine down east. Yeah, great stuff. Well, great and sad, but a complex problem here with healthcare that you guys going into that are going to experience firsthand. But it's good to look at this. All right, so disability. So disability is a word that can be thrown around, has various meanings. You look at disability in terms of the government. If you claim disability, if you get it, you get checks because you can't work from the government, kind of thing. Disability, some people think, well, you're in a wheelchair using crutches as a disability, but it's really going to be any kind of physical or mental issue that's going to interfere with your normal activities. And in many cases, you can't have a job if you had a stroke. And although, look at the survival rate of those that survived, a large percentage are left with disability. And it could be depression, and it could be physical disability. Yeah, we call that morbidity. So morbidity is not mortality, but it's going to be sickness or health issue that is going to interfere with normal life. All right, so looking at disability, again, this actually, you can use it as a measure, but I believe mental, disabilities are underrepresented here. I think they're actually higher than this. But yeah, as you age, arthritis is very big, and of course, heart and lungs, because they're just major disease issues, deafness, blindness. So when we look at this disability and morbidity, you can look at it with direct and indirect costs. So the direct costs are what it costs to treat the disease. Maybe you're getting dialysis. And some diseases morbidities are cheaper, and some more expensive. There's some really expensive chemo and hepatitis C drugs, and there's some things, medications or stuff that are actually out of reach for a lot of people, which shouldn't be the case. And then there are cheaper things like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, my simvastatin's like, pennies per pill, things like that. So some direct costs for some diseases are exorbitant, and some are quite relatively cheap. But those direct costs you can imagine for an illness. What treatments do you need, et cetera. Indirect costs are the costs for having this disease, is not being able to work. It's money lost and productivity lost. So the direct cause is treating the disease, and indirects are, of everything else, the cost that it costs because you have this disease. All right, a couple terms for you. So when we look at diseases and the frequency of the disease, you can look at, here's a population of 1 million. How many people have the disease? That's the frequency. And interesting, looking at here, this is looking at the flu over time. And you can see the frequency, it peaks in these winter months. And we know that because we're indoors, closer to people, and it's more easily spread at that time than people that are outdoors, and viruses don't like being in the sun. Now, a couple measures here, looking at measures here of frequency that are important, is the difference between incidence and prevalence. So these are, incidence is the number of people that are diagnosed with the disease in some unit of time, usually per year. And you have to define what group you're talking about. So incidence, and that is usually done with some acute things like incidence of colds or UTI or a bone break. You're going to see because it happens, and for how many people does it happen in a year? Now, prevalence is how many people in the population have a particular disease. All right. And so this way, it doesn't make sense to talk about like having tetanus or UTI because those come and go. We wonder like, how many times does that occur? What are the chances of me getting that? That'd be the incidence. Prevalence is if you look at someone, prevalence of diabetes in the population or a particular cancer that you live a long period of time. So yeah, prevalence usually looking at chronic illnesses, and then incidence is how many times does this occur? But you can look at both. For instance, this chart down here is looking at HIV, and so you can see the incidence is how many times that infection was diagnosed, and so you can see in the 80s is when it was the most, and then it's gone down with education and such. But it's people live a long time with the disease, and so you're going to see how the prevalence will go up, but the incidence, even if it goes down, because people, as you're diagnosed with it, you continue to live in the population and it grows. And so you can look at this, looking at this tub. Incidence is the number of new cases that come in, and then the tub is the population, and prevalence is how many people have it, and that will go down as people recover from the disease or they die. So they come out of that population, so it's going to change the prevalence. All right, so incidence, prevalence are similar, but you should know the difference. Mortality rates, pretty straightforward, right? How many people are going to die? You need some kind of time reference. And then survival rate, people often ask this with a particular disease, especially cancer, a percentage of people that will live for a period of time after they're diagnosed. What's my survival rate? And then the term prognosis means what's the outcome? What's my prognosis? And you can look at either morbidity or mortality for prognosis, right? As an example here, brain cancer. And so you want to say, what's my prognosis? And they could talk about what's your mortality rate or what's going to happen. And if you want to look at mortality rate, in this case, it's age dependent. And so you want to say, hey, I'm 20 years old. I was just diagnosed with brain cancer. What's my survival rate? And we do this because we're able to do this because we record data, right? In hospitals, we record data. And so the more patients we have, the more accurate we can give you a range of how long you're going to live. So you can see survival, the median, which is that middle number, is about a couple of years if you're young. If you're over 70, it's less than 6 months. So you can see if obviously everyone's alive when you're diagnosed, because that's when you get the diagnosis. And you can see here the pink line, in 1 year, you have a very low survival rate if you're old, but you can see if you are a much younger person, like that black line, your prognosis is much better. All right, so you guys, you're able to work with these things. What's the survival rate? All right, so acute diseases. Here we're thinking things that come on quickly, but they're not usually chronic and long lasting kind of thing. And so if you look at it, we're talking about colds, allergies, sinus infections, injuries, of course. A car accident is broken bones and lacerated spleen. These things are acute injuries that you're going to have. They could be life-threatening, but they're not chronic diseases, that diabetes and Alzheimer's and cancer that can last a long time. And acute illness is normally something of the young people. Chronic diseases come up as you get older. You can have both, but that's just general. So interesting, like why do all these diseases pop up as you get older, right? You look at all these different things. And let me tell you this. This is interesting. Maybe you never thought about this, but let's talk about genetic diseases. You see a lot of genetic diseases that pop up in cancers as you get older, after age 40 and 50. And let me tell you this about evolution. If you have a genetic disease that affects you early in life, there's going to be strong selection against that being passed on. If you have a genetic disease that kills you, but it doesn't occur until your 40s and 50s, 60s and on, there's no evolutionary selection against that because you're past your childbearing years. You guys thought of this? Diseases that happen after your childbearing years, you've already had your kids, you've passed on those genes. Now, if you have a genetic disease that affects you in your teens, you're less likely to leave those genes because you haven't had children, and that genetic disease will not be passed on. So you see a lot of disease happening in old age, genetic type diseases, because there's no evolutionary selection against it because it's too late. You find out you have a disease in your elderly years, you've already passed it on, and those offspring are going to have that disease, and there was no way for evolution to stop that. That's something that's pretty fascinating. So there's little selection for strong selection against diseases after your childbearing years. Yeah. And of course, you know, it's also the wear and tear, the constant exposure to environmental toxins and things like that that are going to cause, you know, cataracts and cancers to occur. So chronic diseases are going to, as you get older, things start breaking down, don't they? Yeah. And chronic diseases take up a large share of our medical costs. I mean, broken bones and UTIs and colds are a huge impact on our population, but it's these chronic diseases that cause the majority of the deaths and the healthcare costs. One of these chronic diseases is periodontal disease, and your teeth fall out, and you can see as the elderly, a lot of people have this. So, and again, this is huge disparity in the haves and have-nots. If you have regular dental cleanings, you're much less likely to have this be a serious issue. Mental diseases, Alzheimer's, dementia, and we'll see arthritis, back pain, presbyopia. You know, as your eyes get older, you need reading glasses. Yeah. Interesting, yeah. So life expectancy in the 20s, you expect to live into your 50s. Now it's 80s, could be 90s as we go forward into the middle of the century. And what's really caused this increase in life expectancy is not because we developed new artificial hearts and technologies. A lot of it has to do with basic sanitation and vaccines and stopping childhood diseases. Remember, this is an average. And there's a lot of childhood death back in the medieval times. Kids didn't get out of their teens. We've really been good at stopping that, and that brings up the average lifespan. It's also medications and inventing MRIs and things like that. But it's true. But a lot of it is just basic health, sanitation, vaccines that have raised our lifespan. And I say raise our lifespan, I say average lifespan, because, you know, humans 110, 112, there was people back in medieval times that lived that long, a few people. So our total lifespan isn't changing, but our average is as less people die younger. And looking at around the world, you can see lifespans are much shorter in parts of the world that have less healthcare, less sanitation, more nutritional problems, starvation and stuff. So you see some of the richer countries in the purple, Canada, above the United States, even Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Chile. lifespan. So life expectancy, all of you are picturing some of the causes here of poor nutrition, poor healthcare, poor sanitation. That's going to limit lifespan. This just shows in Japan, for instance, lifespan increasing. Look in the 40s, you expect to live into your 60s, on average, and now 80s. And I put this also to show the differences in males and females. So American males can look forward to 67 healthy years. Well, women, 70. Why? Well, many causes, but men drink, smoke, more obese, less likely to seek medical help, less adherent to their medications, riskier behaviors. So all these things lead to a lower lifespan. A eunuch, if you castrate a male, you take out the testes, they live longer. They have less testosterone, causing some of these risky behaviors as well. So, yeah. Like I say, men are dumber. Should not say that, but they have more risky behaviors. I will say that. And you see this if you look at old folks' home. There's more women than men, right? So this aging is a progressive, irreversible disease. Although people are trying to find the fountain of youth, trying to see a growth hormone and various vitamins and such can prolong life. One thing that has prolonged life, I talk about in nutrition, is calorie restriction. There's people that just eat very few calories, and it happens in mice beautifully. You can extend their lifespan versus mice are allowed to eat ad libitum as much as they want. Yeah, but I say, who wants to live that way? Who's not going to enjoy food? So aging is a normal process, absolutely. Yeah, and I've already talked about this. Is some things, if you have regular checkups, you're going to catch some things. You're going to get your blood pressure checked. You're going to get an annual flu shot. All these things will help you to live longer. And so with this increase in lifespan, we have increases in things like Alzheimer's and dementia. We have people living with chronic diseases longer as we increase our lifespan. So you've all heard healthcare, we're going to need more healthcare professionals as our population ages, because there's more health issues as you get older. And yeah, it begins, my God, you get to, you guys, you're like at your peak, most of you, and then it all goes downhill. You look at decreases in muscle mass and decreases in brain, your brain decreases, your mass, your lung, you lose like square foot of surface area every year after age 30. Yeah, and so as you age, it's a lot of variables will change. None of it is good news, except maybe more wisdom, right? Yeah, and then I'll show you how aging and death rates, you're more likely to die as you get older, obviously. So taking a look at death rates, a couple things I just want you to notice. Obviously, when you get into old age, your chances of dying skyrocket, right? If you look at your 95, what are your chances of living 20 more years? 0, right? Right. If you're 20 years old, your chance of living 20 more years, very, very good in modern society, U.S. society, looking at this. And so what you see here, if you look at early on, if you can die early in childhood if you have one of these congenital problems, we see that. But if you survive past that, you are once you survive past those issues of genetic and developmental issues that kill babies early on, then you have a great chance of survival if you make it into your 1s and 2s and 10s, and then it starts going up. You can see here in your teens, mostly here, looking at accidents, external causes, yeah. And so you've got a great, your survival rate's amazing, until you start getting to these age-related diseases. And then we get to a point somewhere here where some of these things are going to really catch up with you. Your chances of death are much greater as you get elderly. This gets messy, doesn't it? Anyway, this is just showing the changes from the 20s, the 60s, into the 2000s. This is looking at percentage of deaths, and so you can see early on in the 20s, this blue line quite high. So a lot, especially look at childhood deaths. Oh my God, right? So we've really brought that down, being understanding childhood diseases and vaccinations and stuff, that measles and smallpox that would kill people early on. We've really brought that down. And then looking at here, 20s, 60s, 2000s, yeah, you can see moving, further and further to the right, meaning we're living longer lives. And so aging, of course, got a friend who wrote a book on aging, studies turtles, which and crocodilians, some things that live over 100, have very long lifespans. And why is that compared to a small mammal? One thing is, each time the cells divide, they only have a finite time they can divide. You guys remember telomeres at the end of your DNA? They shorten with each division. And so there's that. Plus waste products build up in our cells. Our collagen and elastin and connective tissue gets more cross links. We get more wrinkles. All things that are associated with aging. So it's a mystery why we age. Obviously wear and tear, but why do we have a certain lifespan? There are things we just don't know. We don't know all this. Yeah. And so two terms here: age-dependent disease means that as you get older, these diseases happen. And so presbyopia is your eyesight. Your lens gets less elastic, and so you start to need glasses to see things far and close. Your lens doesn't change shape. Indeed, we have hyperplasia, these cells over dividing. Your endocrine, your glucose levels, your hormone levels, osteoporosis increases related to some of these endocrine changes, these hormone changes. Your joints, the cartilage is just going to degenerate over time. Age-related means that you can age, but you don't necessarily have this, but it is related. Those that are older have this more, but not everyone has this. Yep. So many kinds of cancer appear early on. You can see, we'll talk about these skin issues and heart of the arteries and high blood pressure and Alzheimer's. Happens more in the elderly, but not everyone gets Alzheimer's. Some people are perfectly sharp without any dementia into their hundreds. Yes, but indeed, some of these things associated with aging I've already talked about, but your immune system just gets worse as you get older. You heal less. You're not able to handle things you could when you're younger. Glucose tolerance, your brain loses mass, constantly, your cerebrum throughout your life. You have less muscle, more fat. You have more bone breakdown, osteoporosis, a little stronger in women related to estrogens. Your skin gets thinner and less elastic, and your healing is much less. When you look at a geriatric patient, it takes much longer to even skin wounds as well as bone breaks, etc. And yeah, digestion, your digestive system, and your teeth are usually the problem in the elderly, but even more issues with constipation and digestive issues. All right. All right, so I talked about a lot of things, hopefully interesting issues here. But mainly, you get out of it, I want you to know what are the major diseases that kill people and cause morbidity, illness here in the US, and then less also in the world, realize that they have other issues that we don't in a richer country like this. And then understand age dependent versus age related diseases, things that go on as you get older. Yeah, so good topics. I hope you enjoyed and hope you're doing well.